My name is Mark Kligman. I'm the interim director of the Yunus and Sarai Nazarian Center for Israel Studies. The Nazarian Center is situated here in UCLA's International Institute. Our center provides academic discourse that addresses Israel's history and culture, both past and present. Our program tonight is Challenges to Democracy and the Struggle for Israel's Soul. We have a dynamic duo that are both wearing blue and white tonight. They match each other really quite well. It's my pleasure. I will introduce them both. We'll begin with the program with Rami Hod's talk, and then we'll have a discussion between the two of them. Rami Hod is the executive director of Berl Katznelson Center, a think and do tank that builds the ideas, policies, and leadership of liberal Zionism in Israel, while providing regular commentary to Israel's mainstream media and major publications. Hod has concurrently established the National Taskforce to safeguard Israel's public education, initiated the 100 Days Plan for Israel's Democracy, a comprehensive blueprint of major policy programs for Israel after the Netanyahu government's judicial overhaul. He served on the public Directorate of Israel's National Social Services, Bituach Leumi Council, which consults the Social Services Ministry on key policy issues. He holds an MA in Sociology from Ben Gurion University in the Negev. For our present academic year of 24 to 25, Rami Hod is the Diane and Guilford Glazer Foundation Distinguished Fellow here at the UCLA Nazarian Center. The moderator tonight will be Dr. Tamar Hoffman, who is the Israel Institute Fellow at UCLA's Nazarian Center, and also in the Department of Sociology. Prior to joining UCLA, Tamar held the Rothschild Postdoctoral Fellowship at UC Berkeley Sociology Department. Having earned her PhD in political science from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Dr. Hoffman specializes in human rights under the joint program Human Rights Under Pressure with the Freie Universität in Berlin. Dr. Hoffman has also served as a Japanese government scholar, conducting research for 2 years in Kyoto University's Institute for Research in Humanities. So first we'll have Rami's talk, and we invite you to take the note cards and pencils that you should have received when you walked in, and then we'll collect your questions on those cards. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rami Hod.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Thank you, Mark, for this introduction, and thank you for the Nazarian Center for letting me feel at home in the last 5 months now, for the Glazer Foundation for this opportunity to be here for you. My daughter Yael, she celebrated her 9th birthday last week, 9th. Like any obsessive dad, I sometimes scroll through Google Photos to peek at how she looked as a baby on her first day at kindergarten, at Passover last year. While doing so, I also come across the following pictures of her. Yael on my shoulders at age 2 at a protest against a nation-state law that discriminates against the Arab citizens of Israel. A picture of a 4-year-old Yael walking with me and my wife to vote, then voting again at 5, then voting again at 6. Many pictures of Yael at 7, holding a big Israeli flag that we have at our home, at protest against the judicial overhaul and in defense of our democracy. Listening to me speak at yet another demonstration, only to ask me in the car on the way back home, Dad, why do people invite you to speak? You're not interested. I could go on and to tell you about Yael. She's an amazing kid, believe me, objectively. But these pictures don't just tell a story about her, they also tell a story about what has happened to Israeli democracy. It pains me deeply to say this, but as Yael and her younger brother Omri grow up, their democracy is shrinking. A series of legislative initiatives and policy actions by recent government have undermined Israeli democracy. Since October 7, almost inconceivably, the judicial overhaul has only intensified. Instead of focusing all the national effort on security, on fighting terror, on aid and recovery, the government is pushing forward with the following actions. The government passed amendment number 37 to the police law, known as the Ben Gurion law, which grants the Minister of Internal Security the authority to dictate police priorities, including those related to specific investigations. The Minister of Justice refuses to recognize the authority of the new President of the Supreme Court. These days, a bill proposing total political control over the Judicial Appointments Committee is under discussion. A law that allows the Minister of Education to easily fire teachers who express political views he doesn't like, without hearing and without a court ruling on whether those views violate the laws. Public broadcasting is also under attack, while Channel 14, aligned with the government, received millions in government benefits. In the last state's budget, billions have been allocated to ultra-Orthodox private schools that don't teach math or English. For the first time in Israeli history, the government budget allocation for these schools will exceed the budget allocated to regular public schools. What connects all these actions is that they are not policy decisions one can agree or disagree. They are not right or left. They are not conservative or liberal. These policies replace basic and democratic norms such as equality before the law with what the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban described as illiberal democracy, in which the only principle is majority rules. If you have a majority, you can do everything. This is Israel's democratic backsliding. Our family will return to Israel in the summer after a year-long journey in Los Angeles. Israel is our home, but our country is in a deep crisis. Yes, the Hamas massacre of October 7 traumatized citizens and soldiers, including most of our best friends and families, and the fact that our brothers and sisters are still held and a hostage in Gaza have brought the national mood in Israel to an all-time low. But make no mistake, the constant lump in our throats, the bad feeling that we have almost every day and every night, comes from the combination of the war and the fear of our democracy. Maybe some of you can understand it. Yeah. So what is happening to Israeli democracy? What explains Israel's democratic backsliding? One explanation we often hear is it's the public opinion. According to this view, the Israeli public has been shifting far and far to the right in a process that began in the Second Intifada and reached its peak now. Due to terror and security fears, we have become less tolerant, less inclined to believe in peace, more open to extreme ideas. This shift in public opinion has pulled Israeli politics also to the right. The right wins elections, form coalition, and change policy. That's how we ended up with the judicial overhaul. The problem with this thesis is that it's not really true. Yes, Israel public has moved rightwards, but the power relations between the two political blocs, center, left, and right, has not significantly changed in Israel over the past years. Well, the Likud is often the largest party. Since 1977, when it first won the election, it only had 2 opportunities to form a government only with right-wing parties, simply because the right has not held a majority. Israel went through 5 elections precisely because of the political tie between the blocs. Beyond that, the shift to the right in public opinion has been quite modest. According to a new public opinion poll published a month ago by the Hebrew University Directorate Center, deep in the trauma of October 7, remind you, nearly half of the Israeli public still believe that Israel should agree to an arrangement described as follows: a political security agreement backed by the US, which includes the establishment of the Palestinian state in exchange for Arab state recognizing Israel. On civil issues, the Israeli public is actually becoming more liberal. Support for LGBTQ marriage, women's rights, and freedom of religion is growing. Most of the public was against the judicial overhaul, and the sectarian and economic policy of this government, which pulls lots of billions of money to the groups that are aligned with the government, is highly unpopular. In the broader picture, the rightward shift in public opinion in Israel is modest. The right's political advantage is fragile, and it is simply incorrect to claim that this is the reason for Israel's democratic backsliding. The second explanation we offer here is it's the conflict. According to this, democratic backsliding is an inevitable consequence of a military rule over civilian population in the West Bank. It is also an inevitable consequence of living under constant security threat, where at any moment you could be killed in a terrorist attack or in the army. When we are focused on our survival, we are less willing to acknowledge others. I believe it's hard to argue against this argument. The problem is that it's not necessarily true. During the Second Intifada, when terrorist attacks occurred on almost a daily basis in Israel's cities, believe me, it was terrible to live in Israel back then, in the streets in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and others. The Israeli government, led by right-wing leaders, didn't initiate anti-democratic laws and reform. In fact, there was no real change in the status of the Supreme Court, in the rights of the Arab citizens, free press, and the content taught in schools. Actually, the judicial overhaul was initiated 2 years ago, after a decade in which Israel experienced relatively low level of terror. Therefore, even if we accept these two theses in principles, it's the public opinion or it's the conflict, they do not explain the concrete and dramatic changes occurring now in Israel. They do not explain the timing and their goals. To explain this, and more importantly, to navigate our way out towards a better future in Israel, we need to dig deeper. We need to focus on ideas. And Israel's political ideas are changing dramatically. Radical ideas, which were never part of Israel's political mainstream, which were never part of the mainstream right in Israel, are turning into laws and policies. The driving force behind this idea is not the Prime Minister, although all the national media is covering him, I can understand why. The driving force, the ideological force, the organizational force behind it is the Israeli religious right. In the American political research, it is widely accepted that since the 70s, the conservative movement has transformed the Republican Party. They did it by building a network of education, policy, and media institutions, and developing new, well-structured ideas. A similar process has been unfolding in Israel over the last 2 decades. Israeli scholars like Maya Mar and Berl Katznelson and Asaf Sharon have been making this argument for some time. I too have been writing and speaking about it for a while. Since the judicial overhaul, our argument has gained more traction. Here is the short story of what happened. The disengagement plan for Gaza and Northern Samaria in 2005 drove the religious right in Israel into a deep crisis, a trauma. The evacuation of settlements was not initiated by a left-wing leader, but by Ariel Sharon, who was also considered to be the chief architect of the settlement project. The religious right protested, but Israelis, even in Likud strongholds, simply stayed home. They responded with either support or indifference. The trauma led the religious right into a conclusion that has already begun to emerge during the Oslo Accord, and even before the peace with Egypt, when Israel evacuated Yemit settlements. The conclusion was secular Zionism, as embodied by liberal democratic parties from the right, center, and left, has lost its way. Religious Zionism must take the reins of national leadership. This strategic shift is best understood through the writing of one of Israel's central figures in religious Zionism, Rabbi Eli Sadan. Sadan is the founder and head of the Bnei David Military Academy. After the Gaza disengagement, Sadan wrote, Herzl's vision of a Jewish state established to solve the problem of anti-Semitism cannot sustain today's struggle. Even the Declaration of Independence does not provide a complete solution. Our Jewish state is not like any other Western state, where all citizens have equal rights regardless of religion, race, or gender. This is the Jewish state. Only the Jews and citizens should have voting rights. We must establish, he writes, the true Jewish state. This is his word, the true Jewish state. Redefining our national goals and educate the people to believe in it. Build an academic wall that is pure and suited entirely to the light of the Torah. Let us place strong forces in the army, in the judicial system, in the media, and more. So, this is the idea. The religious right must present a comprehensive and alternative not only to the left, this is obvious, but also to the secular right, which has failed. The alternative is the true Jewish state, like Saddam calls it, replacing the Jewish state of Herzl's famous book, and the Declaration of Independence, the two foundational document that established Israel for day one as a democracy. Replace them with a true Jewish state, which is, in simple terms, as you can see, a non-democratic state. The way to achieve this vision is not simply by doing the same thing that the settlement movement and the religious right has been doing for years, which is settling on the hilltops of Judea and Samaria, building new settlements, but by settling in the hearts of Israelis. And this is achieved by entering the country's central institution, education system, the judiciary, public service, not to ensure better representation of religious right individuals, a claim I can think is basically justified, but to fundamentally reshape the DNA of these institutions according to the new vision. We can see clear examples of Sadan's worldview, again, a very important rabbi, and a clear example of the strategy in dozens of interviews with the current finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, one of the most influential figures in the country today, as well as with a long list of journalists, rabbis, and intellectuals from the religious right, because I respect them, I read what they are writing. This is what they are writing. This strategy was implemented through three key efforts: introducing new ideas, establishing institutions, and engaging in politics. In terms of ideas, well, the old Israeli right, the one that identified with Sharon, with Begin, with Netanyahu until 4 or 5 years ago, opposed the two-state solution because of security concerns, and advocated for the status quo as the least bad options that we have. The new religious right actively advocates for annexation of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, without giving the Palestinian citizenship, of course. If you look at a decade ago, only a decade ago, annexation wasn't even a part of our political vocabulary. No one talked about it. Today, it has become a consensus across all right-wing parties in Israel. Find me one MK from the Likud who say that he's against annexation. I can't find even one. Well, the old right of Begin, Sharon, and again, also Netanyahu until recently, respected judicial independence. The religious right drafted the judicial overhaul long before it served Netanyahu's personal legal interest. You can find excellent reports, even in English, on how these laws were drafted in the office of right-wing think tanks long before the current government was sworn in, similar to Project 2025 here in America. Well, the old right never considered injecting religious nationalist content into secular schools where my kids study. The religious right, during his terms in office, when they when the ministers and deputy ministers of education basically rewrote our civic textbook. All these ideas, and it's important to emphasize it, all these ideas are new to Israel's political landscape. Over the past decade, they have moved from the margins to the mainstream, ultimately becoming a consensus within right-wing parties and political elites. But ideas are not enough. They need institutions to disseminate them. So, over the past decade, religious right has undergone a new process of institutions building. New think tanks, new media outlets, publishing houses, leadership programs. All these institutions were established in the last decade. These new institutions are joined by the long-standing institution of religious Zionism, the religious Zionist education system, which provides very political education from age 6 to age 18, youth movements, and over hundreds of military academies and yeshivot Esder. Not all of them are extreme. Some are moderate. Some are also liberal. But the mainstream, the political, the chief rabbis, the supervisors come from the ideology of Saddam. This network of all the new institutions is very similar to what you know from America, sometimes called in the political literature the conservative machine. The Koch brother institutions, think tanks like Heritage, Cato, and all the new media outlets. The third element is politics. The most significant change in parties in Israel over the last years is not how the power is divided between center, left, and right, as I said, but it's the large-scale registration of organized settler groups into the Likud. This has also changed the composition of Likud Knesset members. 1 year ago, just 5 months after October 7, a major conference was held in Jerusalem. Title, Only Transfer Will Bring Peace. The agenda was not to fight against terror and to do other stuff, but rather mass expulsion and the re-establishment of settlements in Gaza. Participants danced and sang, describing this whole thing period as a manifested miracle, a rare opportunity to fulfill the messianic vision. 10 years ago, not 50, 10 years ago, such a conference would have drawn maybe 2 fringe Knesset members from the far, far, far right. This time, 27 Knesset members out of 120 and 10 ministers from all the right-wing parties, including the Likud, attended. As the judicial overhaul, this shift didn't happen overnight. It is the peak of the ideological, institutional, and political process I described. In fact, in terms of Israel's political history, there is nothing new here. In the early 20th century, Zionists were not the majority of the Jewish people, but they were the most determined and organized group, building institutions, having a clear vision and a strategy. That's why they succeeded, fortunately for us, and we have a Jewish state. The labor movement, which led Israel from the pre-state issue until the late 70s, and even sometime before, after, never held a majority, but it was the most organized and determined force, building effective institutions. Same story applies to the settlement movement. History teaches us, international history, Israel and Zionist history, teaches us that a determined and organized group that knows what it wants to achieve will always be more effective than the silent majority. If you're wondering why the judicial overhaul is still advancing now during the war, with all the legislation that I described before, much, much more, despite the opposition of the majority of the public, this is the reason. If you are wondering why there is a fierce resistance within our government to move forward with the second phase of the hostage deal, despite overwhelming public support, and the fact that in practice the military effort has concluded long time ago, this is the reason. The religious right does not have a majority, neither in the public nor in the government, but its ideas have gained substantial influence. So, what conclusions can be drawn from this analysis? What can we learn about Israel's and the potential for future change? Here are three short points. First, reality in Israel is dynamic. The condition of the religious right after the Oslo Accord, after the Gaza disengagement, was far worse than the situation of democratic liberal camp today. Far worse. Israel democratic backsliding is not an inevitable fate. It's not a product of how the country was founded, and it's not a result of an anti-democratic public opinion. Israel experienced a massive and democratic liberal wave, including peace agreements and peace proposals in the 90s and in the first decade of the 2000s. It is now undergoing a troubling process of democratic backsliding and a devastating war. But nothing is deterministic. Everything is dynamic and shaped by the various movements, the actors, the institutions that are fighting for Israel's soul, like any other society. Second, the struggle against the judicial overhaul, the biggest struggle in Israel history, and one of the biggest struggles that happened over the last couple of decades in the world, I'm sure that you followed, is a defining moment for Israel's democratic liberal public. During these struggles, I say we because, as you know, I was there, we have come to see that while we were busy doing other things, going to high tech and becoming, an international and going abroad and doing lots of things, but basically avoiding politics and power, the religious right was busy building power. This is also why the struggle was so effective. It captured a deep sentiment of we finally woke up after all these years. Could this moment be for us what the Gaza disengagement and the Oslo Accord was for the religious right? I believe this is the most crucial question in Israel today. The question is whether this awakening will reshape the strategy of democratic liberal Israelis and our civic and political behavior. Will we be able to articulate and inspire a new vision for Israel, one that ties together strengthening our democracy at home with enhancing security and advancing regional arrangements at our borders? Will we see a wave of institution building, young people with democratic values joining centers of influence, education, public service, politics, religious institutions? I believe this is our primary challenge. And one last word about the conversation in Israel here in the US. Minor issue that I guess that none of you spoke about and thought about in the last year. One key takeaway from the short story that I shared today is that you can't discuss Israel without analyzing Israel, without analyzing the internal situation in Israeli society and politics. You have to examine the processes that shape how political camps in Israel develop ideas, build institutions, and consolidate power. You need to look at education, law, economics, religion. Same thing we analyze in any other society, even one engaged in a bloody national conflict. Yes, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a major factor. It influenced everything. And if I had to choose one problem to solve, I would choose this problem. Because it's about our lives and our security. But analyzing the conflict and its future prospect, discussing about Israel and Palestine, without a serious examination of the ideological, economic, political power dynamics within Israel is a mistake. It's superficial and it leads nowhere. This is why both the colonialism narrative, which basically reduces everything that is bad in Israel to some supposed original sin of Israel, and on the other hand, the denial of Israel flaws, the denial of the democratic backsliding, are mirror images of each other, basically. Both these narratives of the radical left and some in the right engage with a mythical Israel, not with the real Israel, not with the concrete state, with the concrete society that I described. Neither help us understand Israel, neither help us to improve it. I offer a different perspective. Yes, it's a troubling story of democratic backsliding, but also one that says our future can be better. Israel is a dynamic society. If we see this and democratic and security crisis as a moment to stand up and rebuild. I want to remind you that Israel has done it in the past. After a war of independence, when Israel lost 1% of its population in the war, we have built a state that was a democracy from day one, despite all hardships. In 1949, we passed a state education law, ensuring public education for every child from age 6. We established a National Insurance Institute, creating a safety net for all in 1953, only 4 years after the country was established. We have built public health clinics in every corner of the country, for Jews and for Arabs, for center and periphery. After the Yom Kippur War, the greatest national trauma until October 7, we have made peace with Egypt. The unimaginable became possible. After the first Intifada, we enacted basic laws that protected human dignity and human rights. We made peace with Jordan. We signed the Oslo Accords, which, despite all challenges, and there are many challenges, still lay the foundation for a solution of a two-state solution, and continue to facilitate strategic and effective security cooperation between our security forces and the Palestinian Authority. Yes, even now. In the toughest times and out of the greatest trauma, we have accomplished remarkable things. To me, this is the Zionist story, this is the Israeli story. And I believe that with the vision, with the strategy, with courage, we can do it again. So that one day, not far from now, I hope, my daughter won't just join me in protesting against bad policies pushed by our government, but will also take pride in it and live in a Jewish, democratic, secure, and equal Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Rami, for this really fascinating talk. Just a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please write on your note and hand them over to Maura or Gage or some of our staffs. So, Rami, I had a few questions that came up throughout your talk, which I really found illuminating in so many ways. But the first question that comes to mind is that if this is a story of democratic backsliding, we have seen the same story repeat itself throughout different places in the world. Some would say here in the United States, Hungary is definitely a case in point. Other countries in Europe. So I would like you, if you could kind of explain more, how is the Israeli case particular? In what ways does it just not follow a general trend?
Thank you, Jamal. I think that it's very important to acknowledge that it is democratic backsliding. And it's important to point at it, and I'm saying it in front of the audience that I assume by 95% that cares about Israel or that wants Israel to remain a Jewish democratic state, especially in the, I would say, the pro-Israel community, right, center, left, doesn't matter, but people who care about Israel, it's important to say, yeah, Israel is unique, it's the only Jewish state in the world, but it suffers from democratic backsliding, and a very extreme one, right? And only if we acknowledge it, only if we name it, we can solve it. I think the Israeli case is not very different from what happened in Poland, in Hungary, here, in other countries. But I think that the combination between democratic backsliding and a bloody national conflict is very dangerous. And we've seen it in October 7. On October 7, Israeli society was in its weakest situation, the most polarizing, the lack of trust in the government, the belief that even the majority of the Likud voters, that the government is not doing anything that regarding their socio-economic status, education, health, but is busy in a reform that no one understood, believe me. My dear aunt, who was like a mother to me, she votes for Likud for 40 years. She's a moderate right-wing voter. She cares about peace, she cares about human rights, but she trusts the right and Netanyahu on security. She didn't care about the judicial overhaul. She doesn't care about it. So the toxic and the combination that we have, that a democratic backsliding leads to a situation where all our enemies, and we have lots of enemies, as you know, can attack, can say the society is weak. Now it's an opportunity. And basically, I think that the judicial overhaul is directly connected to the timing of the October 7 massacre. Directly connected to the decision to the attack. Now, the basic motivation to commit every terror attack you can imagine about Israel was there and will be there. It was there before the country was established. But I think that Israel can't allow herself to be a non-democratic society. It can't allow itself to be a country that is under democratic backsliding. That's one answer. The second answer is the role of religious, right? We have a movement, the religious right, that will stay even after Netanyahu will leave. Right? Their vision is very clear. We know what they want to do, right? So the combination of democratic backsliding and religious extremism is something that I think is not 100% unique to Israel, but it is unique. And the third point I want to mention that I had the privilege to host two members of the Polish and the Hungarian opposition in a big conference of the institution that they ran in Israel 3 years ago. They were with us on the street. We gave them Israeli flags. They marched with us in the street for democracy. They were shocked. They told us, we have lots of things that we can learn from you. And I think the Israel example of fighting against anti-democratic legislation, making lots of adjustments, is something that other countries that suffer democratic backsliding can learn from us.
Okay, so this brings another question. Can you elaborate more on what can be learned from the liberal struggle against the judicial overhaul, the policies that are being sought after now, or the ways of the struggle that are being discussed?
I think that the religious right that initiated the judicial overhaul, against same voices that are now against the second phase of the hostage deal, basically they were alone in the boxing arena until the judicial overhaul started. Number one challenge is to have a democratic, liberal, Zionist camp that doesn't only fight against bad things, but is trying to rebuild Israel after this disaster. And there are no shortcuts. This is a true story. There is a strategy of Israelis who are going to fundraise and to do talks, and they say, I have a project. This project will change. We have an election campaign. Now, this is the most important, every election, it's the most important election that we ever have. Like every summer for my mom, it's the hottest summer that we have in Israel, right? No, it demands patience and persistence and strategy. And I just described a strategy that has worked for the religious right for 20 years. It's institution building, it's education. It's the same, basically, it's the same things that are working for political movements throughout history, right? The challenge that we have is how to translate the protests into a movement, how to translate the fact that many people walked out every Shabbat throughout Israel and protest with an Israeli flag, to a process in which we are building think tanks, education institutions, media outlets, things that will promote the democratic, liberal, Zionist message about Israel. We are lacking institutions. It sounds weird, right? But yes, for many years, the center left was in power, so we didn't develop any civil society institutions that allows us to promote our values when we are not in power, right? We need more pre-military academies, like the one that we have in the institution that I run, that takes 18 years old kids, not kids, 1 year before they join the army, a gap year, that tells them, do something meaningful in the army, but after you graduate after the army, don't just go to make money. Live a life of public service. Go to education, go to go to politics, go to public service. This ethos that says to young liberal Zionist kids, youth, students, this is your country, go to serve in important places. This is an ethos that the center left in Israel has neglected. The religious right took over it. And by the way, the process that I described is a democratic process. It's not a conspiracy theory. The religious right, and I tell it to my friends and many families that I have from the religious right, they did an amazing job at promoting the revisions. So the challenge is to develop an ethos that is not an ethos of, I would say, like a Zionist ethos. To say, we have Israel, everything is safe, let's go and do other things. No, to be in the places where decisions are making. For many, many years we didn't do it. The Democratic Liberal Zionist camp didn't do it. The judicial overhaul, the struggle against it, started to say, right, people began to awake and to tell themselves we weren't playing the game. Now it's the time that we can do something different. Something different.
So you described the situation in which the trauma of the disengagement from Gaza has really mobilized the settler movement and the religious right, and in creating this grand vision and really an operative steps to accomplish it. My question is, what happened to the liberal left? Is this just the idea that of post-Zionist that kind of left the liberal left out? The idea that you just mentioned, that Israel is here, we can start, or is it something more profound?
Yeah, I think that first of all, it's not. There is a reason why I didn't use like left and right, because I don't think it's left and right. I think it's when I'm speaking about the democratic liberal camp in Israel, I'm speaking about a wide range of opinions from moderate right, old school right, which used to be the majority of the Likud voters in Israel, centrist and left Zionist, and some of the Arab parties. So it's a big camp which disagree on the conflict, which disagree on socio-economic policy, but agrees on the concept of a Jewish democratic state as written in Israel Declaration of Independence. That's what connects me and my moderate right friends and my friends from the center. It doesn't connect me with people from the far right and from the far left, right? So what went wrong is exactly what you said, Tamar. There was a notion that, like the end of history, Israel democracy is safe, we have a conflict, we will solve the conflict, or we will not solve the conflict, but we can manage the conflict. But Israel democracy is safe. One problem with it is this, that Israel democracy was not safe. Israel democracy is extremely fragile. Israel democracy, it's very easy to break what was built for many, many years. And again, the ethos, and I do lots of educational work, I give lots of talks, lots of courses with high school students, and soldiers, with university students. You can feel for many, many years that the religious right, young people are very committed to serve, are very committed to be in places where decisions are happening because of the trauma of disengagement, because of the trauma is if we will not be there, there will be another evacuation of settlements. If they will not be there, there will be another peace agreement with the Palestinians, but also because now, I disagree with them, but they are not my enemies, they're political rivals. They are passionate Zionists and they want to promote their vision. But this was the ethos among young religious Zionists in Israel in the last 20 years. Go to public service, go to education, go to other places. In the democratic liberal camp, center left, and some of the right, there was a different ethos. That's what led to the judicial overhaul. That's what led to the fact that the religious right is so strong, although in the public opinion and in the Knesset, it's not so strong, but it's very dominant because they played, again, they were alone in the boxing arena. So this is the mission, and I believe we can do it. I know that I spoke in, I think, 30 or 40 demonstrations during the judicial overhaul. The think tank and the education institute that I run in Israel work with the Israeli public, with mainstream young people doing lots of education work. I can see the eyes, I can see the look, I can see a much more committed liberal Zionist generation that wants to save our democracy, but also to improve it. This is something that didn't happen before the judicial overhaul.
Another question. You talk about, when we think about really the religious Zionist as an ideological movement, it's very clear why they would work in order to make their vision come to life. However, when we really look at the political landscape, part of the people who have been mobilizing this same vision do not share the very hard ideological concern. Yet they feel very much committed, like Minister of Justice Levine and others, very committed to the judicial overhaul and to changing Israel's composition as in terms of its democratic status. Can you elaborate more on what brings these bedfellows together?
Yeah, the judicial overhaul is basically, it's a coalition between three forces. The settlement movement, religious rights, and you ask yourself why they don't want Israel to have an independent Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court, by the way, against all these lies that are being told by my aunt on Friday, before they call her and say Shabbat Shalom, she tells what she thinks about our court. Our court always accepted, most of the time accepted the position of the IDF and gave the IDF and gave the Shin Bet basically to do most of the things that needs to be done in order to fight terror. So it's not a right-wing issue. Right? The settlements movement care about wants Israel not to have an independent jury, Israel not to have an independent Supreme Court because they want to annex Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, even private lands of Palestinians. That's the vision. The vision is annexation. Annexation of the West Bank, annexation of Judea and Samaria, meaning, you know what it means, right? This means that if I'm sitting in a panel, or I'm not doing it anymore in the last, since the war, it's really impossible, but you know that, I think, with someone from the far, far left. And when they're saying Israel is an apartheid state, and colonialism, and all these things, right? And I say, listen, we have an occupation in West Bank. I'm against it. I think that in order for Israel to remain Jewish and democratic, we need a two-state solution for Israel's interest. But the occupation is temporary. We didn't annex the West Bank. What we will say after annexation? What we will have as liberal Zionists? What answer can we have when the annexation policy that is now promoted on the ground will be finalized? So the secular right want annexation. This is why they don't want a Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court can rule that annexation is against basic laws and human dignity. The ultra-Orthodox, why they don't want an independent Supreme Court, why they supported the judicial overhaul, because they want to institutionalize and legalize all the benefits that they have, including not drafting to the army. The Supreme Court in Israel basically said to the Israeli government again and again, draft a law that will enlist all the Orthodox because it is discrimination against secular young people not to have all the Orthodox in the army. So the ultra-Orthodox doesn't want the Supreme Court in order to legalize the fact that they are not drafting to the army. And the Likud, which is what we asked about Yariv Levin and even Netanyahu, it's interest. It's not ideological. The Likud, the moderate right, our conservative movement in Israel, right? Our conservative party, like here, has changed dramatically. So the Likud wants it out of interest. The combination of these three forces led to the judicial overhaul. That's what happened, basically.
Thank you. Thank you, Rami. I am going to take some audience questions. So this is actually more of an explanatory question. If you can please define a little bit more, what do you mean by democratic backsliding? Is that what's happening necessarily undemocratically? You can elaborate more.
Yeah, all the laws that I mentioned before, it's basically a notion that says that the definition of democracy, again, is expressed by the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, is majority rule, without the basic democratic rights that defines liberal democracy as we know it in the last 50 years. And this is democratic backsliding. The notion that laws and policy initiatives and reforms that basically gives an elected government the ability to do what it wants to do without any checks and balances and without any other institutions that can defend basic rights. This is democratic backsliding, and all the examples that I gave before show you what Israel's democratic backsliding look like. I should say, I said it before, the majority of them will stop because of the protests. Okay? But again, it's still taking place now during the war.
Is the silent majority in Israel still completely silent, or are there new voices emerging in the center left?
So, as I said, it's not silent. That's the positive. That's the good news. The good news is that the judicial overhaul created a sense, a very deep sentiment of lots of people. You can hear it. You know, most of my friends are not political. You know, like my high school friends, my soccer friends, and you can see that we've been in a fast process of politicization during the protest. People who didn't care about politics understood that politics cares about them. People understood that the laws that are drafted by the government, the laws that are being passed, will basically make Israel not a place where they will want to call their children. And you can see it. There is, and again, it's terrible. And there is an unprecedented wave of young people, middle class, educated, academic, high-tech culture, leaving the country since the judicial overhaul. By the way, it's not the war. We've been to terrible security times. We know what it's like. October 7th doesn't look like anything we experienced, but still. So yeah, the silent majority is not silent because it's waking up. This is the hope, and you can see it in polls. You can see it in polls. Center-left doesn't win, and again, I'm not talking about center-left, but the wide coalition, ranging from the moderate right, who I disagree with on many issues, but democratic people who believe in Israel as a democracy, and the Zionist left in polls, in every poll since the judicial overhaul started, in every poll since October 7th, is winning. I hope it will remain like this until the elections. But this is the process that is happening, and this is the source of optimism. This is the sort of optimism. This is why Israel politics is dynamic. This is why the power relations is so dynamic. One challenge that we have, and you know, we had like the change government before this Netanyahu government, which was a very successful government, if you ask me. But the challenge is to have a new coalition, a new government that is composed by different people from left, center, right. And unlike the last government that said, we disagree on the conflict, let's put conflict aside, and let's initiate lots of policy action on socio-economic issues, on state religions, and other issues that are important. The future, I hope, new government, post-October 7th, post-judicial overhaul, can say it, because the Palestinian issue is here. So this is another challenge. How to have a democratic liberal camp that used to disagree on the conflict, but went together to the street to demonstrate for democracy, find a formula that it can agree on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. This is the challenge. It's a huge challenge. And I hope that the US administration here will help us with this challenge.
So this actually brings to another audience question concerning the Trump administration. Do you think the Trump administration is helping Israel? Yeah, well, yeah, you think it's helping Israel, what are your views on its policy? Hard one, but.
My views are that if I was living here and I would check all the issues that are on the table, like women's rights, like LGBTQ rights, like socio-economic issues, like abortion rights, like healthcare, I would be very afraid of democracy here, and I wouldn't vote for this president, and he doesn't share my value. But I wrote it on Facebook, and I hope that people here will not get upset. I know that my friends from the left are getting upset when I'm speaking about it. The hostage deal, the first phase, and hopefully the second phase, is a result of a different style, very different style, on foreign policy. And we thank him for that. That's the fact. We thank him for that. And I also thank the Biden administration that, unlike some of the propaganda that we hear from the far right of Israel media outlets, had Israel back since October 7th. My deputy director at the Berl Katznelson Center, he tells a story. He went to reserve, like most of our staff, right on October 7th, and he was with his friends from with other soldiers, hundreds of soldiers, when Biden gave the dawn speech. Remember the speech? The dawn speech. Religious people, religious soldiers, secular, right, left, center. He's the officer, so he's in charge of all of them. Were together in a dining room in the north, saw this speech, and all of them cried. Right? So I support and I say thank you for any US president, Democratic or Republican, that has Israel back, that gives Israel back in its justified fight against terror. I hope that he will not say after a couple of weeks from now, bye-bye Middle East, I'm going to take my business somewhere else. I hope that the line that says a second phase of the hostage deal, all the hostages back home, right? But also doing what Israel did since day one of its establishment, having diplomatic arrangements after the war, because the war is not the goal. The war is a way to achieve security. I hope that he will initiate, form a coalition of moderate Arab parties with Israel and with a new Palestinian Authority that we have security cooperation with, also during the war, and will help us to take the region to somewhere new, because this is the #1 challenge that we have. We have to strengthen democracy home, but we need to understand that the conception of Israel can manage the conflict. We can deal with the profile, with the conflict without solving it. Is bad for us. We should solve the conflict. We should, when we have an amazing opportunity to do it now with moderate Arab parties and with the US president that has Israel back.
So you envision now one way in which we, a path forward from the current conflict. One of the questions that has been asked is if you can envision what will happen the day after Netanyahu, and if that would be, for example, a liberal party or a liberal prime minister, what policies would that party pursue?
I used to work with the former security minister, Rami Hod, former leader of the Labour Party, and he taught me when I was very young, 23 I think, he told me, always imagine, always have a big vision, but be very practical in what you do with everything. So I try to take it to my work at the Berl Katznelson Center, to my writings, to everything that I'm doing, not always successful, but I'm trying to do it. So what I would want, Tamar, I would want a third, I would want a government like we had in 92. I would want a third Rabin government, a center-left government that takes bold decisions, not trying to drag things like Netanyahu did in the last 20 things, saying we have a problem, let's put it aside. We have another problem, let's put it aside. a government that takes the decision Israel has to make in order to remain a Jewish democratic state. Right constitutions, having a border, go with the moderate Arab states, with the Saudis, with the US, to a regional agreement. This is something that Rabin and Barak didn't have. The change in the Arab world wasn't an engine behind the Oslo Accord and behind the Camp David initiative of Barak. Now we have a different reality. It's placed in our side. Countries want to be part, right? Normalized relationship with Israel. So I would want a government that takes bold decisions that are unpopular, but Israel history is proven that brave leaders make unpopular decisions, take us forward. Ben Gurion made very unpopular decision, took us forward. Ariel Sharon, that is again before Gaza, receiving lots of criticism. Imagine the situation now with Israel living within Gaza, how it would look like. But this is my vision. It's not practical. So I think the things that we should inspire, and this is a good scenario for Israel. During the change government that was led by Naftali Bennett, someone, believe me, that I didn't vote for, coming from the religious right, the institution that I ran in Israel worked very closely with the center-left parties in the government, drafting lots of legislation. I took part in the coalition negotiation, trying to find common ground between right, center, and left. It wasn't easy, but we found it. And you know what? It was a great government for Israel. It was a great government for Israel. People who disagree find places they can agree on. So I hope that the next government, and I think it's a very practical scenario, and it can happen, will be a new coalition of moderate right, center, Zionist left, with Mansour Abbas, the leader of an Arab party, of an Islamic party, that made, I think, the bravest step that ever an Israeli leader has done, which says, I recognize that Israel is a Jewish democratic state. I want to be part. This is the victory of Zionism, from my perspective. So I hope this government will look like this, and will take us forward, strengthening democracy at home, writing a constitution, and going to necessary diplomatic arrangements that are complementary to the security efforts that our army and security forces has done since October 7th. This is, I think, a practical vision that can happen. The challenge is how to work within this government, which is the things that I really like to talk about, but I will not do it now. Thank you. I want to say one last sentence, Mark. I'm sure that you will do it. I think that because it's so important to talk about the internal dynamics in Israel, and because it's so important to have a more concrete and a full picture of Israel, the work of the center is extremely important these days. Extremely important, because it creates a real conversation about Israel, not about the mythical Israel, but about the real Israel. So I want to thank the Center for Israeli Studies. I want to thank the Nazarian Center, the Laser Foundation for having me, Sharon, the chair of the center, because the work of the center is extremely crucial, and there's a tight connection between the work of the center is doing and have a better vision for Jewish democratic Israel. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here, and we hope to see you again tomorrow.